Hey, so this is video one of my series that I'm just beginning on my biggest music learning mistakes. So this is going to be a series where I'm going to talk about some of the biggest mistakes I've made in learning various instruments as a hobbyist. Most of these are going to be things like something that I didn't learn at the right time, or something that I learned wrong and I had to, reap the consequences later on, and it made the music experience later to be less rewarding. So mostly it's going to be stuff like that. But the one I decided just for fun, I'm going to put as the first one on my list, the actual biggest by far mistake that I made, even though it's not quite in the category. This isn't a practice mistake I made per se. This isn't a theory, how to approach an instrument. It's actually a little more of a personal mistake that I made that's definitely sabotaged my ability to enjoy music as a hobbyist. So I decided to go back and turn back the clock to when I was somewhere between 7 and 9 years old. It's hard to regret it per se, because I almost feel like it was a completely different person who made this great music mistake. And this was just me when I quit piano. So I actually took piano lessons as a kid for something like close to a year. I barely remember it. I don't remember a lot about it. Mostly what I remember is hating it and quitting the first chance I got. And I thought I was all the better for it. A couple years later, I remember when I was a little bit older, I remember my sister commenting, because she started actually after me, and she was, cruising along and getting better. And I remember her commenting, it gets kind of better as you get further along. It's not so bad. And I wasn't about to be moved by that claim. I was firmly convinced that I had escaped and she had not. You know, it wasn't until I was a teenager and I started kind of maturing emotionally a little bit, that was when I started to actually like music. Or perhaps part of it was just realizing I liked music. I don't know. But it was in that age range when I started to actually find music interesting, especially the emotional aspects of music. And then when I was 15 or 16, I actually would spend these long hours, long periods of time, just going through my little collection of music, which is a lot of it was like MIDI and stuff. But even though it was stuff like that, I was fascinated with it. I would kind of meticulously categorize them. This is just for fun. Categorize them by their moods and emotions and stuff. And and this was like, where did this kid come from? Who's obsessed with music? I thought he hated it. It took me the longest time to admit to my sisters that I was beginning to fall in love with music and to regret my decision to quit learning. When I graduated high school and went to college, at that point I knew nothing about music, other than how much I enjoyed thinking about what each piece of instrumental music represented, like I was saying before. But in terms of like how music works, or about how to play an instrument or music theory, anything like that, didn't have a clue. But somebody recommended I take vocal lessons, so I did. I signed up for vocal lessons, I think my first semester. And then it just so happened that throughout that year, I ended up sitting through just a large number of music performances at my church, not to mention recitals. And every time I saw somebody going to town on the piano with a grade whatever 8 or 9, the top notch skills, whatever they had, I would just kind of imagine in my head what it would be like if I had stayed with piano and I could play like that, kind of the salt on the wound. But as the saying goes, mistakes that you've made, you can never undo. And then I finally broke at one point, and I decided, you know what? It's way too late to learn piano properly because I'm an adult now, but I just have to play. So I finally broke, and I said to myself, I don't care if I only ever get to play, like little 3 notes at a time kind of thing, like what an 11-year-old can play. It was kind of like I broke, and I'm like, okay, I gotta be able to do this, or else I'm gonna die, because music was so compelling to me, and I wanted to play it myself. It's not the same as listening to it. So anyway, long story short, I started and I never stopped. It was every bit as good as I had expected it to be. And before long, I had actually passed my initial goal. My initial goal was I just wanted to play something, where I can express myself in some way. My next goal was to be able to improvise, to actually create my own self-expression, not just play the notes, but this is my notes, you know. And I just wanted to do that at the most basic level. I didn't think I actually could make up actual stuff at any point. But then I met that goal and I passed it. And but the funny thing is, when you love something that much and you meet your goal, it's just not can't be the end, you know. And with music learning, it's one of those things where the sky's the limit in the sense of you never reach the end. You never run out of ways to keep growing and improving and getting better and loving it more. I mean, what's the point of growing and improving? That doesn't sound very fun, but the thing is that the better you get, the more you love it. So anyway, that's kind of where I'm at now. I've kind of become a music hobbyist. Like, it pretty much is my hobby. Um, and I ended up that because I had so much fun becoming an adult learner at piano, I actually, back in 2014, I kind of was just beginning to feel that addictive bug inside me. And in 2014, I decided to see if I could do the same thing with guitar, you know. And then after that, in 2015, the addiction really set in, and that's when I started adding more instruments to my collection. But anyway, I'd like to analyze this fatal mistake, because this series, I want to talk about mistakes, and usually, like I said, it's going to be stuff like, you know, practicing wrong. But I want to analyze this one too, because it was a mistake. It's a mistake that other people have made. I've heard other people say the same thing. And it's a mistake that some people would do well to think about. So I'd like to kind of analyze it from my own perspective and see what I can learn about what went wrong. Because the fact of the matter is, I'm a music guy. So why did I not want to learn music? You know? So I'd like to kind of think through some aspects from the angle of me as a kid, and also think through some aspects from the angle of the music teaching process. So first, thinking about my own experience as a kid, why did I want to quit so badly when I'm a person who actually is wired for music, relatively speaking, compared to other people? I mean, today, I don't think I could survive one day without being free to play music whenever I want to. But that's because I'm an adult, you know, who experiences emotion deeply, rather than being, you know, a kid who you don't experience emotions quite the same as a kid. Most boys 12 and under, I think you could safely say, most boys 12 and under haven't yet begun to experience the emotional awareness that makes expressive music so interesting. So all I wanted to do back then as a 7 or 8-year-old was just get out of practicing and get back to playing computer games. So part of what made me hate music was the fact that music is an emotional language, but emotions weren't of interest to me yet. And another part of what made me hate music was the fact that practicing piano was a task that required a certain kind of focus and patience and intentionality that I certainly didn't have at the time. So we were required 30 minutes of practice a day. During those 30 minutes, I was constantly bored, kind of just waiting for that horrible 30 minutes to pass so that I could get back to gaming, get back to my overstimulated gamer brain. You know, there's a lot of research coming out that shows that overstimulation through chronic gaming, as well as other similar things, but it can cause anyone, whether it's a kid or an adult, can cause you to experience shorter attention spans, diminishing patience, kind of this felt need to get back to that source of overstimulation, get back to, let's say, the gaming world or social media or whatever. So, you know, certainly moderate use of technology can certainly be healthy and appropriate for kids. But I think that excessive media consumption or gaming can result in kids showing symptoms of ADHD that are acquired symptoms. Now it's referred to as variable attention stimulus trait, or VAST. That's a kind of a new term to distinguish it from ADHD proper. It's this kind of these acquired symptoms of ADHD from gaming, social media use, etc. So, you know, really, nobody's going to enjoy spending time on music practice or skill building of some kind, or anything else that takes all of this patience and is kind of aimed at self-improvement in that sense. You're never going to enjoy that if your brain is constantly craving the overstimulation and excitement of some of these other things. So that's part of my analysis of what led up to my choice as a pre-adolescent from my angle as a kid. You know, this is the kids part of it. that led to me hating music, even though I'm really wired to love music. But what about from the angle of the teaching process? How did that maybe influence this great mistake that I made? So the teacher that I had kind of used the classic "let's work through this book" kind of approach. When I go back to books as an adult, I've actually gone back to the same book series that I used, and everyone else in my family that learned piano as a kid used the same series. But even today, those songs, when I look at them, they're just really emotionally boring, just like they were to me when I was a kid. So in the first two or three books, pretty much throughout those songs just carry little to no feeling. And I don't think that this is just me being biased by remembering them, because I don't really remember most of them. I think it's actually the songs just are unemotional and boring. So thinking back, it's no wonder I didn't want to practice them. There were a handful of songs that I remembered wanting to practice and wanting to play. And actually, as an adult, when I was just starting piano as an adult, I actually went and I remembered some of those, and I went and dug them up out of curiosity. One of them in particular, it was called The Blue New, I think. And it was this kind of sad minor key song that turned into major key near the end. And funny thing is, when I pulled it out as an adult, I was actually just as thrilled by it as an adult as I was as a kid. So in a way, no wonder I wanted to quit. The songs I was playing were boring. No wonder I thought piano was boring. Even at that young age, even though, certainly as a kid, you don't appreciate and you're not fascinated by emotions the same way you are as an adult. But even at that young age, I did actually want to play songs that were more expressive. I just wasn't being given them. I just didn't want to play these unexpressive, boring songs that didn't mean anything to me. But probably the biggest factor that led to me just being hating it so much that I was, had no interest in keeping going, and was, very insistent on wanting to quit. Probably the biggest thing that happened in terms of the teaching process was my teacher actually allowed me to advance through the method book without having properly learned this prior stuff. And it seems like her method of teaching, it worked great for a lot of students, particularly for students who were very methodical and determined. But in my case, as this kind of impatient, very like experientially driven kid, what I would end up doing was just barely squeaking by being able to play this song, or even, not quite being able to play it. And the reason I could squeak by is not because I understood it enough. It was because I was kind of half memorizing it, half intuiting it, and half just guessing my way through it. So she would kind of grudgingly allow me to pass the song and move on to the next one, which is what I wanted, because I certainly didn't want to be forced to play that song more, that awful thing. Problem was I hadn't learned to read that song at all. I was just kind of intuiting my way, guessing my way through it. So then you come to this next song, which is much more interesting, and I'm happy, and I go back to my half memorizing it, half intuiting it, and half guessing my way through it. But then once you stumble through a lot of songs like that, you come to stuff that's literally impossible. Like, if you don't know how to read, you're not going to read this song that's way past, where you ought to be. Yeah, so when I think back to all that, I kind of do wonder a little bit if I would have loved piano maybe back at age 8, if only my teacher had been able to maybe get some teacher training a little bit, that could have maybe brought up some ideas about maybe how to recognize where kids are at, maybe some tips and methods to get kind of a sensitive and careful approach to think about a kid's individual personality, rather than pressing them into a mold that may be for that kid, maybe an experientially painful mold, or might just simply not be it might just be an unrealistic mold. I wonder if even at that young age, maybe I would have gobbled up lessons if they were talking about creating my own music based on things that I liked, or maybe about improvising, or about writing out television themes by ear, and actually I kind of, I have these vague memories of, after I had already quit, I have these vague memories of this one period of like a week or two, where one of my sisters actually went and walked me through some of that stuff when I was 10 or 11. And at that point, I had already firmly planted my feet in my, I'm not interested in piano. But I remember, she took me like a week and she's like, hey, I'm going to teach you these things. And I kind of liked it. Because the thing is, it wasn't piano I hated. It was being expected to sit on a bench and repeat boring and meaningless finger movements while I'm hearing come out of the piano these boring and meaningless tunes when I have far more exciting things to be doing. So that's why I'm very convinced that it's best if piano teachers can find a way to find things that kids actually want to play, which a lot of teachers do now. I think a lot of the kind of accepted normal way of teaching has changed a little bit since I was a kid. I think that was pretty normal back then. Now, as I talk to people and stuff, a lot of teachers do take a much more creative and a much more student sensitive approach to teaching. But yeah, find something they want to play and then try to give them tasks that fit their personality and interests, so that they're actually going to want to practice the stuff that they're doing. And they're going to want to be consistent on practicing, on those days when the parents aren't forcing them to practice, because no parent can force the kid constantly to do anything. So anyway, that decision that I made as a pre-adolescent definitely qualifies as the biggest music learning mistake I've ever made. It's a little bit of a different category of mistake than most of the ones I'm going to be talking moving forward through this series. But, to this day, that's why my sight reading skills are, let's just say, shaky at best. I'm working on it, but I really can't sight read. I can sight read at a slow pace. I've been working on it with a little bit of focus, maybe for like a year or something. Yeah, so anyway, in the next video in this series, I'm going to be keep talking about my biggest music learning mistakes, but these as ones that I made as an adult learner. I'm going to start, so my next video in this series is going to be talking about the massive mistake I made that took me so long to recover from, which is the mistake of going years without ever learning to play without looking at the keys. So I'm just going to talk about why I made that mistake, why I thought it was okay, and why I think it's so important that from the very beginning, you are learning to play with your eyes shut.